in 1951. I was 15 years old, and I knew Frank Perry, and H.P. Kelsey had hired Frank as a general manager for the nursery because he was a business manager. He wasn't a nurseryman, but he knew business. And a lot of the problems they had with the nursery, it was going downhill because they were taking the loam out of the land where they were digging out the property. And on this property here, they leased this property here from Colby, and it ran all the way over to Tyler Road. There was a big field over here where they'd taken out Mugo pines, but in the process they dig out the loam because they bone and burlap the shrubbery. So they take out a portion of the loam, so it needs to be brought back into usable property. So they hired me, and I happen to know Frank because I was, at the time, I was seeing his daughter Bunny, and I'm not sure whether Frank hired me to get me away from a Bunny or whether he really needed somebody to do the work here, but and whatever, it worked. But I ended up on this property here. I ended up all the way over, right over to Tyler Road. There was a big field in through here where they dug out all the Mugo pines, and they wanted to bring it back. So my job was to plow and harrow it, put some superphosphate on it, and harrow it in, and then grade it off as best I could with the harrow, and seed it with a crop of buckwheat. And I did that, and then when the buckwheat blossomed, but did not let it go to seed, we plowed it under and started over again, and did that several times. Actually, we did it 3 times within the season of 1951 of this property here. But once I got a crop growing in there, then they moved me down to actually the Kelsey's Nursery land, which was adjacent to Ipswich Road and where all the houses are today. And we did a couple of blocks there too. But I was able to get 3 crops of buckwheat on this property here and bring the soil all back together. And I only was able to get 2 crops on the property down at Ipswich Road because I just ran out of time. But I did that the first year I went to work for him. That summer of 51, that whole summer I worked on that, bringing the soil back. Then when I got through with that, the next year I had got my license. So they decided I should be doing some deliveries. So when I got through, actually after school, when I got through high school, I went back down there, and they had the truck loaded with nursery stock, and they gave me the truck, 1946 Chevy Raspberry truck, full of stock with slips for delivery all over the place. A good part of it, the first time, was taking stock up to the railroad station in Haverhill, where they shipped all over the country. And I took a couple of loads up there and left them to be shipped out by train all over the country. But then I also ended up with delivering stuff all over the lower part of Massachusetts. I spent a lot of time in Magnolia, Manchester, Wenham, Hamilton. People would come into the nursery and they would buy stock, whether it's azaleas or whatever, hemlock, Carolina, could be anything. And they'd buy it and order it, and then we had to deliver it. Only I had to deliver it, and I was giving a load of stock when I got home from school with a map, and had to go and deliver these stocks wherever I could find it. The hardest place to find that I ever, and I think I did find it, was Peaches Point. And I could not tell you what town it was in.
Marblehead.
Oh, it was Marblehead. But it's an impossible place to find. But I did deliver some stock there. It was kind of unique that this sort of thing never happened, except that Kelsey seemed to do an awful lot of it. And I did that for probably about, 4 years when I was in high school, because I got home from high school and I'd go over there and I'd work until it was dark and I couldn't see what I was doing. And there was always some left over, which I had to deliver the next day. And I did that like I say, for about 4 years. This is the layout of the nursery. Basically, when I was there, it started out with, well, you can see how extensive it was. There was a lot of buildings and a lot of growing area. All of these were all fields. And the sales ground was in this area here, in the office and garage, and all the trucks were stored down in here.
Can you point out Kelsey Road? Is that road?
So Kelsey Road's down here.
Yeah.
I'm not sure whether I can, Ipswich Road, this must be Ipswich Road that went across here. But it was extensive. They had roughly, probably 800 acres of land under cultivation for nursery stock. But they also leased the Colby field, which I referred to. They leased that from Larry Colby. And they also leased a block on Route 97 or Killam Hill Road from my grandfather, which in that block they had down there, went from Pybrook Lane to the Topsail town line, actually, on the right-hand side going towards Topsail. And in that block, they basically had the deciduous trees, like the maples and the birches. They didn't have, I don't think they had any evergreens in that section. It was all flowering crabs and that type of thing. But there was a lot of trees in that area too. And this is just an indication of the men that they had working there. A lot of these, the digging crew and the planning crew worked different groups, but Jim Farinetti, who lived at the corner of Kelsey and Ipswich Road, was the foreman in charge of these men, and he was in charge of the planning crews and the digging crews, and these are just the planning crews. All right, this is probably after the picture of after the nursery had closed down and Dr. Locke had taken it over, but this was an indication of the size of the building, and this portion of the building here was sales area. But over on the side here was the offices. Seth Kelsey, who pretty much ran the business, and he was taken over. And the problem with Seth is he was a great architect and a great horticulturalist, but not a very good businessman. And that was probably the demise of the company eventually. But over in this corner section, there was an office. They kind of went up a set of stairs, and they had a full-time landscape architect by the name of Palmer LaValle, and he had a nice office up there, and all he did was design. He did design for the University of Maine. He did a couple of jobs on 120, well, a lot of jobs on 128, but that's all he ever did. And he laid out the planning for the various projects they did. Over in this corner of the building, this was where it went up a couple of steps, and Palmer LaValle's office was in this corner. And this was the sales ground, which actually a chap by the name of Bill McPherson, during the summer, during the fall and the spring, he worked as a salesman on the sales grounds. It was kind of a unique situation in that Bill only worked until school let out, and then he and his wife Gladys went to PEI for the summer. So he wasn't there during the summer. And his wife Gladys was my 4th through 8th grade teacher at Aaronwood School. So the two of them would pack up when school was out, and they'd go to Prince Edward Island, where they summered there. But Bill was in charge of these sales grounds, and he met the customers and picked out what they wanted. And a lot of the stuff, they might take it with them, but a lot of it was tagged and shipped, and I had to deliver. That's part of what I did, delivering the stuff all over the lower part of Massachusetts. But these sales grounds was all open and all stock. You can see, I'm not sure I could pick out particularly what there is, but there may be some Mugo pines in there.
And what's there now, Charlie?
Houses.
Carolina Way, basically.
Yep. This whole thing is all houses.
Yeah.
This has all been destroyed. But this building here there was a lower level down on this end down here. And in the lower level, which is basically a basement to this building, was where they kept all the trucks and cultivators and all that kind of equipment. They had a lot of equipment down there. And it walked out in the little pond over in the back corner here, where they had pond for irrigation, so they could irrigate this stuff out of that pond, so they didn't dry out. So they had an opportunity to keep it in very, very good condition. There was a chap who worked in outside of this on the grounds themselves, cultivating, and they had a machine called an English horn rototiller, and he rototilled all the stock out in the fields. His name was Horace Hull, but we called him Hockey. But every day he'd go out and he'd crank up that English horn rototiller, which I think at that time the United States did not have a suitable rototiller for this type of operation, and this was bought from England. But he spent every day in the summer just cultivating everything. And this lower level in here, you could drive around the back corner here underneath, and that's where they had the trucks and the tree mower and that sort of thing. Another picture of the sales ground, and this is the way it was laid out. These are probably, well, the evergreens here. You can see there's some here and some here, and there's other evergreens and other deciduous azaleas and the hemlock and the rhododendrons and azaleas and all that stuff were out in there. And they had a lot of evergreens, all a variety, every kind of spruce you could ever think of, and pine trees and hemlocks and all that type of thing. And this is where the people did come in and pick out what they wanted, and they shipped them out to them. So a lot of it went out through the freight yard in Naval, and a lot of it I delivered. This is probably another very good picture, but when they took a big tree out, and they were doing the landscaping at University of Maine in Orono, Maine, when I went to work for them. And this was an indication of how they moved a tree that might be 20, 25, 30 feet tall. But when the digging crew would dig around the circle here, and with any luck, they would pre-plan and know what trees they were going to take out. And they would dig these out and root prune around the root, and then ball and burlap this. And they ball and burlapped it with the penny nails, and you never remove the nails because they rust away and nobody cared. But they burlap it good and tight. Then they had a pin they drove down beside the trunk. It was probably about 2.5 inches in diameter. And they drove the pin down through and a hook on the top so you could lift with it. And you tip the tree over and you put a metal plate. It was a metal plate with probably about 5.5 feet in diameter with a hole in it. And you drove the pin down through, down to the bottom in here. And when you got through, you tipped the tree as much as you could, like it was here. And then you drove the plate down on the bottom, drove the pin through the plate, and pinned the bottom so the plate would stay. And that's how you lifted the tree out. You lifted it out with the tree mover, with a hook up here on the pin, never touching the trunk. So you didn't disturb the trunk, and you really didn't disturb the root system other than root pruning around here. But they moved a lot of trees that way. I think we do have a picture of the tree mover someplace.
Yeah, we do.
All right, here's the tree mover. It's kind of interesting that somebody had some foresight when they did this, because this is an international cab over. So they shortened the wheelbase by running the cab over. And this is where the cables come across with the winch and drop down. And you can see how they pick the tree up with the pin. And they pick it up and slide it in onto the body of the truck. And they could probably take, well, you can see how tall the tree was. And they usually would, before they would transport it, they would wrap this with burlap so that it wouldn't take too much of a beating in transport. But they could probably put 2 trees on this truck. And then they also had a Ford dump truck, which actually had fold down sides, so you could fold the sides down and get more width. And you could probably put about 2 trees on that. Now the chaps who ran this stream over were Nucky and Dooney. They all had nicknames. There was Alfred and Dwight Rogers from Byfield, and they ran the stream over with help, obviously, because 2 men couldn't do it. But they moved a lot of trees that way. And you may already know, has a lot of this larger stock, which probably you could never recognize it today because the trees are 50 years bigger of good size right now. But this was a lot of work and a lot of challenge, but you never disturbed the root of the tree or the trunk. You didn't touch the trunk. So it really was protective of the trees. It was a great operation. Right. Here's another picture of it. And this, I don't know what they were doing in it, but you can see the snub nose of the truck so that they could take advantage of the length of the chassis for transporting the trees. And I'm not sure what they're doing here. This is the sales ground. And when I was working there, they went and they built this pergola, which is all these timbers up here, and covered the top. The whole top was covered with snow fence, so it was shaded, so it protected from the bright sun during the day. And it looked great and worked great for about 2 years. And the hurricane came and flattened the whole thing, and that was the end of that. Because I don't think it was properly secured in the ground, and it was braced up top, but minimal bracing, and it really was an awful lot of work we put into building that thing. And next thing you know, it was gone.
Is that like Hurricane Carol in 50?
Yeah,
55?
I think it probably was Carol, but it just flattened the whole thing, and didn't do a lot of damage to the shrubbery underneath it, but didn't help it any either. But all the stuff was all junk, and all had to be cut away. And this is another picture of it, and you can see how it's shaded. And it was great for shade for the stock, and the idea was good, but the posts were never properly secured to the ground. I think they were just set on the ground. I don't remember. I helped build this thing, and I don't remember ever anchoring them down the way it should have been. And the bracing was certainly not adequate. So this was one of the types of things that happened that the proper management and the proper engineer would not have allowed this. It just didn't make any sense because it wasn't secured. But unfortunately, it was quick and dirty and ineffective.
Gone even quicker.
That's right.
Northeastern.
Okay, this is where I did, they moved me on to doing some of the landscape stuff. And I think this is one, I'm not sure whether this is the one where I did the lawn. I had a crew, they moved me up the ladder so that I had a crew, basically, a chap by the name of Biagio who spoke English. He stood about, 6 feet 2 inches tall. He was a huge, nice chap, and he spoke English. But we had probably 6 other men working that didn't speak English. They all spoke Italian. But Biagio could communicate with them, and I had to communicate with Biagio what we were doing. But we did, I think there was approximately 2 acres of lawn we did up there. Come out beautiful. And learned how to rake a lawn properly. Most people don't know how to rake a lawn. They dig in with a rake. And what we do, you take a wooden rake, which is a leaf rake type of thing, with wooden teeth, and you hold it upright, and you skim the top, and don't rake all the rocks out of the lawn. The rocks, they do serve a useful purpose. They provide aeration for the lawn, and the lawn will come much better if you leave some of them there. But most people won't do that. They rake them right out and throw them away. But these people knew what they were doing, and they'd skim across the top with wooden rake and get it just as smooth as you ever could imagine. And we did this lawn, I think probably got it green so it looked really great. And then probably about 2 years later, they tore it all up for these additions. So it was a little frustrating to see he went to all this work for nothing. This is another one of the lawns we did. Yeah, CBS Itron, and the landscaping with the trees. And you can see the size of the trees that were planted. And they were put in with the tree mower. And they did a pretty effective job of it, which you really just don't see a tree that size move today. But back then, HP knew what he was doing, and he set up the business this way.
Yeah, was this on Pine Street in Danvers?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. It's now an industrial office type area.
Right. The landscaping was really impressive. This is just an example of the various projects that they undertook. And they were extensive. And you know, a lot of the development and the housing was done, and Pamela Valley probably did all of these plans for all of these projects, because that's what he did. He didn't do anything else. He just sat in his office and did drawings and landscaping and denoted shrubbery and where it went, what trees went where, and what walkways went, and this type of thing. Very, very complex landscape plans, but they turned out obviously very well. They decided that I should be in charge of a few of the landscape jobs we did, basically out on 128. And that's where I ended up doing a lot of stuff. I had one big landscape operation. There was a company called, I think it was called Sanborn Associates, but it was a medical equipment manufacturing plant. Beautiful. It was on 128. It was on a street off of the back of 128, parallel with 128. And I worked on that one for a year at least. And we did all the plants and had all the plants in place. And then we had to spread loam in between the plants and walkways and things like that. So they ended up having me work one Saturday because they had the loam delivered with 10-wheelers. And I had to work Saturday and spot all the piles of loam on the project, which I did on that Saturday. And the next morning I came in to go to work, and Seth called me into the office. And I said, oh, what did I do wrong? And he said, no, nothing, but I'm going to have to let you go. And I was kind of mystified. And I said, well, did I do a lousy job or something? No, they did a fantastic job. Everything's great, but I'm just going to have to let you go. And I walked out of there probably a little bit confused, because I really didn't understand if I did a good job, why was they letting me go? It would appear, and I could never prove it, and I never really knew, but I suspect what happened was because they had to have me work Saturday, they had to pay me time and a half, and I made more money than his son Sandy did that week, and that was my demise. Obviously, I was gone. I had a job that I went to the next day, so it didn't bother me too much. But it was kind of interesting. And that was probably part of the falling of the business, because Seth was not a businessman. He was a great horticulturist, a great architect. But HP knew that. That's why I had Frank to manage it. We also had another chap that worked on the grounds, and I never quite could figure out what his position was. But Freddie Jackson from Lawrence, and Freddie was a pretty good horticulturist, but he also worked with all the chaps that came in from Lawrence, and he kind of managed all the oversight over everything, really, because Jim Ferranetti, although he had the digging group and the planning group, he had to know what they needed for stock for that week or that month or whatever. So he really was in charge of that whole thing. Freddie was kind of told Jim what they needed for that week. Then the rest of the crew kind of, well, they had a lot of people overseeing people, but they had a lot of crews. When I got there, because I have no idea how many people are there, but I got to know the Rogers who ran the tree mover, and I got to know Hockey Howell pretty good, and I did know Jim Fernetti, and the other chap that I knew fairly well, and I don't think we have a picture of it, but we do have, there were greenhouses to the right of the Harmony Cemetery, and there were two long greenhouses there, and in that era, they were real greenhouses, because they sunk them into the ground so that you step down 3 or 4 steps into the bottom. And the reason they did that is to keep the floor of the greenhouse below the frost. And it had cement walls, and above the cement was glass. And they had a crank to open and close the glass vents so they get airflow through the greenhouses. But in the winter, they were closed up, and they had a stove. They had 3 big greenhouses long, and they had a stove in each one of them to keep the stock from freezing. And Chet Holt, Murray's brother, ran the greenhouses, and he propagated all the stock that they planted. I don't know how they decided what was what, but he had all kinds of room and area in there, and the greenhouses worked very well. I don't know what else there is. That should do it.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Charlie, for sharing your history with the Boxford Historical Documents Center and the residents of Boxford. And thank you also to Robin Siegel, who did a lot of the scanning and organizes all these wonderful slides. It's amazing where she finds the stuff, but anyway. Okay, thank you for watching. And
there's one thing I did know. Well, they knew it anyhow. The fact that Kelsey put out a catalog every year of their stock.